You picked up your phone more than 50 times yesterday, and you did not count once. You will not count tomorrow either. The day you finally count is the morning a psychiatrist tells you the reward system inside your skull has been degraded for so long it may never return to baseline. And by then you are not the one who gets to decide whether it comes back. Count yesterday. Did you pick up your phone more than 50 times? Now try this. Sit in silence with no input for 10 minutes. Can you? And when you wake up tomorrow, count the seconds before you reach for the screen on your bedside table. If any of those is a problem, the circuit your brain uses to feel pleasure is already on a 7-stage ladder, and you cannot feel the rungs. Most people walk away clean from stage 3. Stage 7 is different. Most people listening to this will scroll for an hour tonight and assume it is nothing. This is how your brain slowly burns out its dopamine in 7 stages. Stage 1. The first high. This is the stage you barely notice, and it is the one that determines everything that comes after. The average American child now receives their first smartphone at age 10. The first hit of variable reward content arrives in a brain whose prefrontal cortex will not finish developing for another 15 years. The dopamine response is enormous because the baseline is normal. The novelty is total. The feedback is instant. Your reward system was built for a world where calories were scarce, novelty was rare, and most rewards required real effort. It was not built for an infinite scroll. But here is the part nobody tells you. The brain does not distinguish between sources. A dopamine spike from a notification, a slot machine, a line of cocaine, and a piece of cake all light up the same neurons in the same nucleus. The receptor does not know whether the signal came from running a marathon or watching a 15-second video. It only knows the size of the spike, and it adapts to the average of all spikes received. You feel great because everything is new. You think this is normal, and this is where it becomes permanent. Every spike teaches the brain to expect that spike again. The pathway grows, quiet, daily, for years. But the first high is the loudest stage on this ladder. The next one is the first one that becomes a routine. Stage 2. The routine. The average adult now picks up their phone approximately 150 times per day. Some studies put the number higher. The scroll session has shortened. The average TikTok user watches roughly 50 short videos per sitting. The average pornography session involves multiple tabs open in parallel. This is no longer the first high. This is the maintenance dose. The brain has stopped treating each spike as novel. It now predicts the reward before the reward arrives, which means the dopamine release shifts forward in time, into the anticipation, not the act. You reach for the phone before you have decided why. You open the app before you have noticed the urge. The strange part is the disappearance of boredom. You used to wait in line and look around. You used to sit in the bathroom and think. You used to ride an elevator without input. None of that happens anymore. Every gap of empty time is now filled by a reach. Your father waited at the doctor's office reading a paperback. His father waited reading nothing. You wait scrolling. This is the only stage on this ladder you can feel, and it is the one most people are trained to defend. You will call this productivity. You will call it staying informed. You will call it relaxation. The receptors behind your forehead, slowly thinning. Do not call it any of those things. What happens next is worse. The next thing the dopamine system does is stop responding to the same dose. Stage 3. Tolerance. The same scroll session does not produce the same hit. The video that would have stopped your thumb 6 months ago now passes without registering. The notification that would have spiked your attention is now background noise. This is receptor downregulation. The brain, defending its narrow operating band, has physically removed dopamine receptors from the surface of its neurons. There are fewer locks for the same key. The same chemical now produces a smaller response. To get the same feeling you had at stage 2, you need a bigger spike, newer content, more intense imagery, more frequent hits, novel apps, novel platforms, novel partners. Here is the part nobody tells you. The downregulation is not about pleasure. It is about expectation. The brain has learned that this is the new normal. It has reset its zero. Ordinary good things, sunlight, conversation, a meal eaten slowly, a book read for an hour, now register below baseline. They feel boring not because they got worse. They feel boring because your baseline got higher. This is the last off-ramp where intentional reduction alone still works. Catch it here. Take a 30-day break from the strongest source, and the receptors regrow. Wait 6 more months, and the system passes a threshold most people do not return from without clinical help. For many people, this is the last warning the brain will give the conscious mind. Everything that comes next is the brain informing the body, not you. Half stage. The false normality. You are not feeling worse anymore. That is part of the problem. The chronically overstimulated brain does not stay alarmed. Within months of the receptors thinning, your subjective sense of what *normal* feels like quietly drops to match the new baseline. You stop noticing that the world has gone gray because the gray has become the default state. But here is the thing. The receptors are not regrowing. The pathway between phone and reward is not weakening. The pleasure you used to get from things that did not have a screen is not coming back on its own. You have simply lost the ability to feel the gap. This is why the people most affected by dopamine burnout are the ones most likely to insist they are fine. They are not lying. Their internal calibration has stopped sending the warning signal. The signal was annoying, so the brain turned it off. You are not just tired, you are degraded. And then the withdrawal symptoms start arriving without you connecting them to anything. Stage 4. The withdrawal. You leave your phone in another room and your heart rate rises within minutes. You forget your phone at home and feel a hollow panic for the entire commute. You try to read a book for 30 minutes and your hands twitch toward a device that is not there. This is dopamine withdrawal. It activates the same withdrawal circuitry the brain uses for opioid cessation. The receptors that downregulated to defend against the flood are now understimulated by the natural background, and the brain interprets the absence as a threat. You are not anxious because something is wrong. You are anxious because the dopamine source has been removed and your downregulated system cannot feel the natural baseline. But the strange part is the pain pathway. The brain processes pleasure and pain on the same seesaw. One goes up, the other goes down to balance. After years of artificial pleasure spikes, the pain side of the seesaw has grown to match. The same volume of weight is on each side now. So when the pleasure source is removed, the brain falls into the pain. Boredom now hurts. Silence now hurts. Patience now hurts. Things that should be neutral feel like punishment. You did not feel the downregulation happening. You will feel the withdrawal every time the source is unavailable. That is the asymmetry. That is the trap. Stage 5. The stacking. One source is no longer enough. The phone alone does not reach the threshold the brain has set. Neither does the snack alone, the drink alone, the porn alone, the game alone, the gambling app alone. So the sources stack. Phone in one hand while watching television, vape while scrolling, drink while gambling, snack while playing, pornography while messaging. The combinations multiply, the cross-tolerance grows, and the underlying receptor count keeps falling. This is the polysubstance behavioral stage. Most people in it do not call themselves addicted because no single source dominates. They will call it being busy. They will call it multitasking. They will call it relaxation. The brain underneath calls it none of those things. It calls it a failing pursuit of the same baseline pleasure it used to get from one source 10 years ago, with one quiet activity. The stacking is not a moral failure. It is the predictable mathematical consequence of a reward system that has been operated above its design specification for a decade. The receptors are not coming back at this volume of demand. You think you are managing many things at once. You are seeking a high you cannot reach with any one of them anymore. After a year, it is tolerance. After 5 years, it is joylessness. After 15 years, it is clinical. Each layer of damage compounds quietly underneath the one above it. None of it shows up on a blood panel. None of it shows up on a routine physical. And the next stage is the one that explains why the natural rewards stop reaching you entirely. Stage 6. Anhedonia. The clinical name for the inability to feel pleasure is anhedonia. It is the core diagnostic feature of major depressive disorder. It is also the predictable endpoint of years of dopamine receptor downregulation. A walk in sunlight does not lift your mood. Exercise that used to feel good now feels like work. Sex that used to be uncomplicated now feels like effort. Food tastes flat. Music that used to move you sounds like noise. The cells that left the receptor surface have not all returned. The cells that remain are operating at a reduced sensitivity. The brain is running on emergency rations of its own reward chemistry, and the natural inputs of a human life, sunlight, food, movement, connection, are now below the threshold required to produce a measurable signal. You are not depressed in the way the word used to mean. You are running on the chemical equivalent of an empty tank, and the tank is the only instrument you have to notice the tank is empty. But here is what nobody tells you. The depression that arrives at stage 6 is often diagnosed as a mood disorder and treated with SSRIs. The SSRIs do not directly address the dopamine downregulation. They keep the person functional. They do not always rebuild the reward system because the reward system was not the original treatment target. Approximately 1 in 3 Americans aged 18 to 25 now report symptoms of major depression, more than double the rate 15 years ago. The smartphone arrived in 2007. The first generation that grew up with one in their hand entered adulthood around 2020. The clinical curve and the technological curve are tracking each other in real time, and the pattern is consistent across countries. You think the depression is the disease. It is the burnout finishing what the early high started. Stage 7. The burnout. The terminal stage is not a single event. It is the state in which the reward system has been so chronically downregulated that pharmaceutical intervention alone cannot restore baseline function. Treatment-resistant depression, substance use disorders that recur across detox cycles. The person who has detoxed from one source 3 times and the receptors still have not regrown enough to make ordinary life feel worth participating in. The architecture is no longer just downregulated, it is restructured. The synaptic pruning that should have happened in healthy adolescence happened around the wrong reward patterns. The dopamine pathways that should have grown around effort and delayed gratification grew around immediate retrieval and infinite scroll. The brain that walks into the psychiatrist's office at 35 is structurally a different brain than the one that picked up the first phone at 10. None of this is dramatic, it is just slow. This is not aging. This is what compounded dopamine downregulation looks like at the end. The treatments that work require complete abstinence from the strongest source for a minimum of 30 to 90 days, often with clinical support. The receptors regrow slowly. The pathways take longer. Some patients fully recover. Some never recover full baseline. The clinical literature on prognosis is honest about both outcomes. The worst part is invisible. Stage 7 is not a single morning. It is the year your brain forgets how to feel pleasure that did not come through a screen. There is no warning before stage 2. There is no off-ramp after the receptors finish thinning. There is no neurochemical that arrives to replace what your reward system used to produce on its own. Tonight will feel normal. The next scroll session will feel normal. The reach for the phone the moment your hand is free will feel like instinct, not symptom. This is not a screening you skip because nothing feels wrong. It is the screening you do precisely because nothing feels wrong. The most dangerous thing about dopamine burnout is that it feels survivable right up until the year you stop being able to enjoy things you used to love. When was the last time you sat in silence for 30 minutes without reaching for a screen? Comment the number, not the excuse. The people most damaged by dopamine burnout are usually the ones most convinced they have it under control. Send this to the person in your life who scrolls in bed every night and tells themselves it is fine. You are not the user of the machine. You are the thing the machine has been training.